Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Cook from the Independence Institute. We're thrilled to have you tonight as we talk about, is this 2025 Colorado's year for nuclear energy? Joined with me tonight is my co-host for Power Gab, Jake Fogelman.
Good to see everyone. Thank you all for coming, and folks on Zoom as well.
Yeah, and we have people in person. We have a large audience on Zoom, so we thank both of you. Also want to thank our co-host on this, or co-sponsor, is the Colorado Nuclear Alliance. So a big thank you to them for participating in this event and making this really a collaborative event. We're going to do this in two stages. So there'll be two panels. The first one will be our legislative panel. And we've got two legislators who are the prime sponsors of House Bill 1040 to talk about why they're bringing it forward. And what's really exciting about this bill, Jake, is that for the first time we're seeing really strong bipartisan support. I'm not saying we haven't seen it before, but we see really strong bipartisan support for nuclear power, and in particular House Bill 1040. So we'll get to that in just a moment. A couple of housekeeping rules. Folks online, those of you on Zoom, again, thank you for joining us. We have muted your mics, so sorry you cannot speak during this, but what we'd like you to do, drop your questions in the chat. We'll be asking questions of our guests, of our speakers tonight. And then if you have questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat. Jake will be moderating that, looking for those, and he'll be asking the lawmakers for this first panel, he'll be asking them those questions. Those of you who are here in person, you've been given sheets of paper and a pen. Just feel free to write down a question and you can hold it up, and Vanessa, the lovely Vanessa, will be collecting those and getting those to us. And with that, I don't think I missed anything. If I did, my apologies, but I'm sure we'll figure it out as we go. We are on a relatively tight schedule. We have two panels. This first one is legislative. The second one will be state leaders. But I do want to welcome our guests and we'll have them say a few words about themselves, and then we'll dive right into questions. We have with us tonight State Senator Larry Liston from Senate District 10 in El Paso County, and we have State Representative Ty Winter from House District 47 down in southeastern Colorado. And both of them obviously support nuclear power for various reasons, and we're going to hear from both of them about why. Gentlemen, would you first, before we dive into questions, just introduce yourselves and real quickly tell, why nuclear power? Why did you get why are you sponsoring this bill, House Bill 1040? And we'll dive into that bill in just a moment. But Larry, why don't we start with you, Senator Liston?
Sure. Well, thanks, Amy and Jake. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I'm not there live, but I've just unfortunately come down with a bad case of food poisoning. So I don't think anybody wants to be around me. But anyways, I am thrilled beyond words as to how far and the great progress that we're making for House Bill 1040. And as you've stated, it's bipartisan, which I've always felt, to be honest with you, even when I ran the bill last year and the year before, I always emphasized that I wasn't trying to do this in a partisan nature. But this year, I think a number of my colleagues across the aisle have come to realize that with the advent of data centers and artificial intelligence that is ramping up kind of day by day, that if we're going to meet Colorado's energy needs, whether it's that or just to keep the lights on in Denver and elsewhere, as reasonable as wind and solar and geothermal may be, it just cannot handle the base load. And to be honest, I don't come from this. My fair city, Colorado Springs, knock on wood, we have a pretty good municipal utility that is doing okay. But we've shut down a coal plant as well. And I can envision down the road someday where Colorado Springs could be caught short for our electricity needs. but I'm not doing this on behalf of my city or anybody else. I'm really doing it on behalf of the citizens of Colorado, that I think that once they come to know and appreciate and get educated about what nuclear energy is today, they're going to be very, very receptive. And we're seeing that each and every day as we speak to people. So that's why I've brought the bill.
Thank you, Senator Liston. And we want to welcome now State Representative Ty Winter from House District 47 down in southeastern Colorado. Representative Winter, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me this evening. Representative Ty Winter, House District 47. I represent 7 full counties and 2 partial counties in southern and southeastern Colorado. Mostly rural counties. I do have parts of Pueblo West, but I'm excited about the bill myself. In my first year, in my first term, myself, Senator Pelton, Representative Lukens, and Senator Roberts ran House Bill 1247, which was an energy study of all different types of energy, and nuclear was in that study. I'm excited to start that. I'm coming at this from a little bit different angle, being a rural representative. As we've seen the slowdown in the oil and gas industry mandated by the state, at the end of the day, it's taking good paying blue collar jobs out of my district, severance tax out of my district. It's really got a negative effect. And, I've always liked nuclear energy. I've always thought it was just interesting and neat to look into. And being here at the building, I've been able to, some of that interesting stuff that I have found out and learned over the years, I've been able to apply to, a couple pieces of legislation that I'm on. So I'm really excited for the opportunity. First and foremost, I'm an all above energy Republican. I believe that wind and solar has its place, but I also believe that coal and oil and gas have their place as well. Geothermal has its place, hydro. The best way to energize this state is through a large portfolio. But at the end of the day, where we're sitting is most of the energy that we're looking at has come from wind and solar at this point. And I think that the state, even though I don't agree with it, the state has set lofty goals for what they want when it comes to the end date on coal and oil and gas. With that being said, it's taken money out of my district, out of my communities. But most importantly is I want to make sure that we have firm, reliable power in this state. One thing that made this country just unbelievably great and successful was the Industrial Revolution. And we needed to power that. And I believe that we will be coming into another industrial revolution type of event. And I think that we have to be able to power that event. So I'm looking for, an energy source that will take care of that and replace those good paying blue collar jobs, as well as add severance tax to the district. So I'm excited to be on this bill. I look forward to getting this bill passed. And thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you, Representative Winter. Senator Liston, let's dive into House Bill 1040. Let everybody know what exactly is House Bill 1040, and why does the state of Colorado need House Bill 1040?
Sure, Amy. Well, really, House Bill 1040 is, quite frankly, I said this last year and the year before, it is a very simple bill. Right now in statute, which has been this way for years, I don't know if it was a error of commission or omission, but in statute, the only forms of clean energy that are recognized are wind, solar, hydroelectric, and I think geothermal. For some reason, and I really don't know why, is that nuclear energy has not been considered a form of clean energy, which it definitely is. It's emission free. In fact, of all of the other sources of energy, it's probably the most green, so to speak. So also what House Bill 1040 does, at least in my opinion, is that it recognizes that nuclear energy is indeed a form of clean energy. And people say, well, so what? Okay, if we do that, well, what that will do, that will send a very powerful market signal to the players out there, whether they're utilities or other types of organizations, that Colorado is willing and open to entertain the concept of having some form of nuclear energy. The other thing that I emphasize, there's no mandate, should this bill pass, there's no mandate that dictates that there shall be or there will be a nuclear power plant built somewhere in southeastern Colorado or northwestern Colorado or anywhere in Colorado. We're going to let the free market figure that out. They're probably better at it than what having a top-down mandate that says, that we've got to do this. So it's really quite simple. We've added a little bit of a provision, it's starting in the House this year. I'm, like I say, very excited that Representative Winter and Representative Alex Valdez are carrying the bill. It's going to get real movement and head of steam. That might be a bad pun, but head of steam. So when it comes over to the Senate, myself and Senator Roberts, I think we're going to definitely get it across the finish line. So in concept and in reality, it's really a pretty simple bill.
I love the optimism there, that you're confident you're going to get it over the finish line. One of the things that I think is important that we reiterate is that House Bill 1040 is not a mandate for nuclear power. It simply includes nuclear power in the state's definition of what is a clean energy resource. The only mandate is that Colorado be carbon neutral or net zero or carbon-free emissions in the power generation sector by 2040. And I don't know exactly, Jake, you may know what that language is better than I do, but 100% carbon-free emissions by 2040. And the key is, what are the resources that are allowed to make up that carbon-free power generation? And right now, nuclear isn't included in it, but with House Bill 1040, it will be. So, Representative Winter, I want to bring this to you because you're presenting this first, and if I understand, went to the legislative website, the Colorado Legislature's website, it looks like it's being heard in the old Supreme Court chambers on February 13th at 1:30, in case anybody wants to go or present testimony. But it is you as a Republican, and then you also have Alex Valdez, who, by the way, we invited to be here tonight and had agreed, but something came up and was unable to come. He is a Denver Democrat who is also on this bill with you. The two of you will be presenting this together. Denver, very different from Pueblo. You talked a little bit about the economic arguments that you'll be making for Pueblo, because we know that Comanche, 1, 2, or 3 are closing down. Let's expand a little bit more about that, the workforce, the economic impact, the importance of possibly doing a coal to nuclear transition where Comanche 1, 2, and 3 are located. And actually, it could be cheaper or less expensive for Coloradans if we do it that way.
Yeah, thank you. And, it's an honor to be on this bill with Rep. Valdez. It's been good to work with him on this bill. We've had really good conversations. And at the end of the day, he realizes that these reactors are going to be in my backyard, first and foremost. There's just a good chance that's going to happen. When we look at Pueblo, also, these plants are great to retrofit into old coal plants. So I think that's one big optimistic issue that we had to overcome, a hurdle. The thing that's exciting for me is there's a power line project coming up through southeastern Colorado called Three Corner Connector. I think they're at about 85 or 90% easement. They picked about that much percentage of easement out of that area, and it's going to come from the panhandle of Oklahoma, and it's going to come into Pueblo. And the reason is there's a gentleman who lives in Texas, and at the time that they had the freeze in Texas, he wanted to invest in a way to backfill power into Texas, and then if we ever had an issue, backfill power to us. So that's exciting to know. We also have the Excel build back coming through southeastern Colorado. So, this will be huge for Pueblo. We've seen, the steel mill. I live on a farm and ranch 8 miles north of Trinidad. I grew up in a coal impacted community. that was Trinidad's claim to fame. I mean, our high school football team were the miners, so we mine coal forever, and then we have that really clean methane gas that comes off the coal, and we drilled for gas. The state that you're in, and you brought it up about what the state has set, these goals are set whether I agree with them or not. So making sure that we have the ability to replace these plants, first of all, to power these communities. And Senator Liston is correct. It attracts new business. It attracts new jobs. The state's done a big effort and a big amount of work on looking at AI and looking at, passing legislation around these centers. And you need to be able to power those. They take a lot of power. It's a big strain on the grid. So I think it's going to be huge for Pueblo. I think that if we can get this done, obviously it's not mandated, and we don't know. It'll take years for shovels to be in the ground, in my opinion. But I think it'll be good for Pueblo and as well as the rest of southeastern Colorado. I could see a couple of these plants. These small modular reactors or micro reactors, they fit on about the footprint of a Walmart in its parking lot. That's one issue that was always a hurdle in Pueblo and rural Colorado, because landowners are afraid of eminent domain. And you need a huge footprint of land to make these places safe originally. Now it's totally different with these small and micro reactors. Secondly, on top of that, they don't use as much water. The technology, they use a material called molten salts to cool the rods. And if they overheat, they actually even crust and encapsulate the rod to a certain extent. So the technology is huge. They're building the Terra plant in Wyoming, which will be a good plant to go visit. They just put shovels in the ground in December. So it's going to give great economics benefit to Pueblo, and I hope the rest of southeastern Colorado. It's going to create good paying blue collar jobs to backfill the jobs that have been taken from CF&I and been taking out of the other southeastern counties with the reduction in oil and gas production. So it's going to be a huge economic driver. And, here at the Capitol, one thing I always say is and when I'm speaking to my urban cousins is we clothe you, we feed you, and we heat your homes. And I think rural Colorado has a great history of being a supplier of energy for our urban cousins. And we want to continue to do that. And lastly, one thing I want to say is living in rural Colorado, folks think our biggest export is hay or cattle. Our biggest export is our children, because there's very few jobs on the farm and ranch with how hard the economy is on farmers and ranchers. So a lot of families are broken up and have to move. And now that these good paying oil and gas jobs are done, it's breaking up communities. So I think it's important to know that these jobs are going to be able to keep families together as well. And I know that may sound silly, but in rural Colorado, we take care of each other and we love each other and we want our families to stay together. So I think that's another driver for me is to have those jobs. If we drop one of these plants in between Bent and Kiowa County, down in Baca County, that will be able to add to those transmission lines, which will be able to help power the rest of Colorado. But like I said, it's going to be awesome to go with Rep. Valdez on this. I think we're going to do a really good job of getting this over. Senator Liston as well. I'm really excited for it, and I look forward to taking the next step into powering Colorado from rural Colorado.
Thank you, Representative Winter. And the other rural lawmaker that is on this bill is Democrat State Senator Dylan Roberts, who was also invited to be here tonight. And he represents northwestern Colorado and has the exact same economic concerns that Representative Winter has. But I will say this, Senator Roberts had to decline because he's out battling the wolves. So he had a wolf issue tonight. We're gonna give him a pass for that one. But he has said the very same things about the economic concerns. And again, it's the closure of coal-fired plant in his district, which is in Craig, Colorado. But Representative Winter, let me ask you one thing about two things, actually. One of the things about the workforce, you talk about good blue-collar jobs. A lot of these people who would work in a nuclear power plant or some other aspect within the nuclear supply chain are veterans, because we have an entire naval fleet that is powered by nuclear. I mean, we have a nuclear fleet. These are nuclear submariners. We have aircraft carriers that are nuclear. And these veterans are looking, I mean, they've got a great skill set and they're looking for jobs. So I want to touch on that a little bit. And then the other thing is, here's the other thing on the economic front, on the competitiveness of Colorado. States around us are investing in nuclear. They're supporting nuclear. I fear, and I'd like to get your reaction to this, that Colorado will be left behind if we don't start advancing nuclear in the state. What is your reaction?
I agree with you. I mean, I would hope that when we get this legislation passed, it'll be the trickle down effect. And then next year it's another bill. And then the year after that, it's another bill. And I think you're 100% correct. I think as businesses look to come in Colorado right now, they're in a quandary because of the clean air laws that are being passed and being talked about. Like I said, the shutdown of oil and gas, there's industries that look at Colorado and say, do we really want to move in to this state with all the regulations and, you know, that heavy handprint on top of us? So I think you're right. I think the competitive edge is important. With this happening in Wyoming, they're just building this Terra plant in Wyoming. Like I said, I was at a conference with some Wyoming legislators, and they said I think they put shovels in the ground the second week of Wyoming. So you're 100% right. If Colorado don't get on the horse and ride, you know, states like Wyoming are going to attract data centers. They're going to attract these veterans that come in. So, you know, to answer that question, I think that we need to do it right. I don't think that we need to do it right. We need to breathe, take our time, pass good legislation. Because one thing I found out in this building, there's a lot of times there's some half-baked ideas that need to be fixed the year after and the year after that. And I want to make sure we do this right because our argument has to be bulletproof. The second part of that is the education piece. When most people think of nuclear, they think of the Mile Island, they think of Chernobyl, and they need to realize that this is a whole different ballgame. These small modular reactors and micro reactors are 10 times safer than once they were, and they, like a thorium reactor, actually spins waste. So it's actually recycling nuclear waste to create power. So I think the education piece is going to be important. When we ran 1247 with Senator Roberts, Lukens, and Pelton, what was exciting about that is to see the young kids come in and testify. Tons of high school kids. I got emails from college kids in Tennessee. We had School of Mines here. We had kids from UNC Greeley. The young kids are excited about this. They're very planet conscious, but they realize the only way for their reason to this to happen, to get to net zero, is through nuclear energy. We see it across the pond in our European countries. So I think the first part of the question is we have to make sure that we do this right. We have to make sure we educate the public about what new nuclear is. And then the second piece about these veterans coming in. I heard that some of these small plants, 250 to 400 good paying jobs. And you have to realize in my community, there was guys working in the oil and gas industry that were making $150,000 a year. And then the not so just transition that we have, it told them, oh, we're going to give you welding jobs at Vestas in Pueblo for $17 an hour. Well, that don't backfill those wages and those families. So they had to up and take their families out. So that component of keeping families in rural Colorado for these jobs and then attracting new families. And let me tell you what, rural Colorado loves their veterans, and we will take them with open arms into our communities. So I'm really excited and optimistic for this. And I really think at the end of the day, all I'm asking my colleagues across the aisle is we may disagree on the policy on how we get to net zero, but there has to be a hand extended in this because my folks are suffering. And on top of that, we want to make sure we have firm, reliable power in rural Colorado. And I think that this is the only way we're going to be able to do that. So I'm excited at the prospect. I would be excited to have veterans come in this community. And more than that, I'm excited for the economic benefit. But like I said, it's going to take a huge education piece campaign, and it's going to take doing this right. That way no holes can be poked in it. And I think that's what we're doing with this bill.
Thank you. Senator Liston, you've also said you're optimistic. In fact, you led off with the fact that you're optimistic about House Bill 1040 getting nuclear included in state statute as a clean energy resource. And I look at this as a kind of a Venn diagram where you have the folks for whom climate change is an existential threat. And then you have the folks who look at it and go, no, reliable power or lack of reliable power is the existential threat. If you were to do a Venn diagram and overlap those two, the one place they overlap is nuclear. That is, it's the resource that they all agree, clean and reliable. And actually, despite the accidents that we've had, it is very, very safe. My question to you, Senator Liston, is this. you've been carrying the torch for nuclear for a while now.
Years.
Why? And then tell us about the nuclear caucus. That's something, I mean, we've been talking about nuclear energy in the Independence Institute it goes back a while, but now we can actually talk about it in public and get invited to cocktail parties and still talk about nuclear power. But you've been a champion at the state legislature. How did it become you? And tell us about the nuclear caucus.
Sure. Well, right to your point, I am optimistic for a variety of reasons that Representative Winter touched upon. I really feel this is going to be the year. I won't say if, when it gets out of the House. I've already been kind of scratching around. Certainly, everybody on my side of the aisle, they're all for it. And I have a strong sense that there's a number of my fellow senators across the aisle, a whole bunch, that as they learn more and more about nuclear energy, like you say, I remember just weekend before last down in Colorado Springs, is that we had a heavy snow, so therefore there was no sunshine and there was no wind. It was one of those. And it was also very cold. So people have come to realize that, gosh, you multiply that out. We have another polar vortex that comes down to Colorado, 5 or 10 years from now. We'll get caught energy short. Yes, I've just been kind of chipping away. It's a real education process. As far as the nuclear caucus goes, last year, right after the defeat of the bill, I think it was Senate Bill 39, which, by the way, as you may know, the outgoing Miss America for 2023 is a nuclear engineer. And nuclear energy is here cause du jour. And so she came to town and she knocked it out of the park. And a lot of people were just dumbfounded as to how much she and all the other witnesses. I want to give kudos to the Colorado Nuclear Alliance, which I know you're going to have on here shortly, as well as numerous other groups. So it dawned on me that if there's anything that we were lacking was the education piece. So we had a series in February, March, April. We had 3, if not 4, lunch and learns where we invited industry people to come in, and which they gladly did, and to come in and educate. And we invited everybody. Like I say, it was nonpartisan. We didn't care who you were, and it met with great success. And just day before yesterday, we had our first one with a Colorado-based company called Energy Fuels, and I'm very pleased to say that we had over 55 people show up, and over 15 legislators were represented. And we're already got another one, which we'll be sure and let you know about, that's coming up February the 25th. We've got a real high-powered nuclear engineer who's written a book called The Case for Nukes by Dr. Robert Zubrin. And so, rather than just try and educate these legislators in a hearing where you have 2 or 3 minutes to make your point, we're going to give these talented expert witnesses, a full hour or more. So I think if we continue to do that, we will definitely carry the day.
Thank you. And just to let folks know, online, drop your questions in the chat. And then if you're in person, we've got a few folks in person. There are sheets of paper. You can hold up your sheet of paper, and the lovely Vanessa will come around and collect those and get those to us. And I'm curious for both of you on this, and we can start with Senator Liston or with, let's start with Senator Liston. And what is the number one concern you get? What's the number one question you get from people about nuclear energy?
Sure.
And how have you answered them?
Yeah. Well, I would probably say the number one or two. One is, what are you going to do with the waste? They conjured up, people conjured up ideas that these nuclear reactors, maybe the old ones, but not the new ones, because they don't even understand what the new technology does. Um, is that, well, what are you going to do with the waste? I've said sarcastically, they think that these nuclear power plants, that they go out and they dump it in the parking lot, which they obviously don't. uh, there are solutions to that. Whether we ultimately bury it deep in a mountain, which could be done, or believe it or not, something that is would probably make as much or more sense is to put it in the casks, that are sealed, concrete, steel lined, etc. And quite frankly, you take them out in the ocean, and there's parts of the ocean which are geologically inert, and you let them loose, and they go down 15, 20,000 feet, and they're buried in the ocean where nobody can get to them. So, to answer your question, the waste is the first one, and then a lot of people are still concerned, rightfully so, about safety, because people of my generation, uh, they still remember Chernobyl and Fukushima. But those types of power plants, especially Chernobyl, will never, ever, ever be built in the Western Hemisphere. It was dangerous and outmoded, and only the Russians would allow that to be built. And I'm sure they wouldn't even build it today.
It was dangerous in the Soviet Union. Yeah, and a place that's known for danger. Okay, Representative Winter, what is the question you usually get from constituents or from folks in southeastern Colorado?
Kind of the same as Senator Liston. My questions are more about land and water, like I explained before. Will they take a big amount of land, the eminent domain, which ranchers and farmers are totally against, most private property rights owners, and then the water issue, which I think we've covered. But one of the questions is why, and why now? Well, we all know that, especially with the COVID pandemic, when we saw supply chains disrupted, that national security is food security. And as we keep covering grazing land and farmland with solar panels and windmills, we're really taking a hit on our food security. So I think, other than the questions that Senator Liston answered about waste and I get water and I get property questions, I think the question is why. And that's what my answer is to them a lot of farmers and ranchers, we're not Yellowstone farmers and ranchers, we're land rich, money poor. And we need this to back them up. And we need to know that we're going to have food security in this country. So I think it's important that we put these reactors in these areas, because at the end of the day, like I said, even with the wind and solar, that's in my backyard. And we have to make sure that we're still able to produce agriculturally good enough that we can sustain feeding Colorado and Americans. So the question I get a lot is why, ma'am? And that's the answer that I tend to give.
Okay, last question before we go to some audience questions. I want to know, since there's optimism from both of you, you're optimistic about the future of House Bill 1040, getting it across the finish line. We know that similar bills have died in the past. If you're optimistic about this bill, are there other bills regarding nuclear energy that we may be seeing? Senator Liston?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it dawned on me in a brief moment of clarity that, like I say, it's not if, but when we do build a nuclear facility, whether it's in Pueblo or Craig or wherever, we're going to need people to build, run, and maintain these nuclear facilities. So myself and Senator Janice Marchman from Loveland, I call it kind of a companion bill that'll come down the road. We filed the bill. It's a workforce development bill that we are encouraging the institutions of higher learning, whether it's CU or School of Mines or some of the community colleges, that we're going to fund this because we know money's tight. We're going to fund it with gifts, grants, and donations. I firmly believe that there are entities out there, whether they're utilities or trade organizations or any number of entities that will pony up some money. And when it gets to a certain threshold, I want to say at least $500,000 or more, then they will start developing a curriculum to train the workforce people, because you just don't slap somebody on the back and give them a wrench and say, well, go out and build and maintain a nuclear facility. We want to do it safely, which, that's paramount, and we want to do it right. And so this workforce development bill, and I'm sorry I don't know the number, it just dropped a couple, 3 days ago, but suffice to say that we have to have a trained workforce, and that's what the bill will attempt to do.
Thank you. Representative Winter, do you know are there other bills that we could be looking at? We have workforce, we have this, nuclear is clean. You're optimistic. Could there be more legislation regarding nuclear, promoting nuclear?
I think there could be more. Talking just in the House, Representative Valdez and I, this is one of those times when crazy interests come together. You have an urban Democrat and a rural Republican, and we found a nexus where we can get together and make good bipartisan policy. So I see a future for that. I don't have anything else this year. I know Senator Liston does, but with this relationship that I've built with Representative Valdez, we've always had respect for each other. And, this is a point where rural and urban can come together. We talk about the rural-urban divide all the time. And I think this is one of those opportunities that we can coalesce around that, and that it's a good opportunity for all of Coloradans. So I would say at this point, I don't know of any other legislation that we're looking at doing, not at this time, but I think in the next couple years, we could see more. We have to take this first step and see where that goes, and then we move from there.
Representative Winter, we have a question I was just saying real quick. Do you expect a packed hearing on February 13th?
I don't know yet. To be honest with you, we'll just have to see what happens. I think that we're going to have opponents and proponents. I know Rep. Valdez has been doing a good job talking to his colleagues in the environmental community. I know that I'm doing the best I can with my folks in the economic development sphere of this. I think that there's going to be a lot of people. I think that there's a lot of young folks in this state that are excited, and I'm frankly excited. I think it's going to be great. And, it was really neat when we ran 1247. To see the high school kids come in and be so excited to talk about this new type of technology and energy, and to see the optimism of the kids from Greeley and from the School of Mines. So I think as we continue to grow the optimism around this, more and more people are going to get involved. And I'm always going to go back to that education piece, because at the end of the day, if we don't do the education piece to this and win over that certain sector of Coloradans, I don't want that. I want them to be able to know that this is safe. So continuing the education piece, I would say, would be probably the most important thing we can do from this point. And then we jump into new legislation after that. But like I said, I'm excited for the concept. I'm excited for the ability, and I'm excited for the chance that Colorado could have to, like you said, be on the forefront and not be left in the dust on this.
All right, we have a couple of audience questions. We'll get to those before we let the lawmakers wrap up and say their final thoughts.
Yeah, before I read the questions, just a helpful commenter dropped in the chat. Apparently that workforce bill is Senate Bill 120, so thank you to that commenter for finding that so quickly. First one here asks about the capital investment required to go through the permitting process and to actually build a nuclear power plant. And this audience member would like to know if there's any plans of the Colorado legislature for any sort of incentive to incentivize a nuclear energy plant in Colorado. So I'm not sure either lawmaker could jump on that, I suppose.
I'll make an attempt at that. Well, right now, I'm not aware. Like say we're in a tight budget year, but it's not like a plant is going to be built here 3 months from now, or they're not going to start turning over dirt. I know that that's one of the things that people say about nuclear energy. Well, it costs so much. Well, part of the reason it costs so much is because of the consistent and constant litigation by the anti-nuclear people. which could be well documented. There are environmental groups out there that thrive on litigating against the nuclear industry. But I think I'm kind of hopeful that, and I can tell you this before I forget, is I've been told by good source that should 1040 pass out of the House and the Senate, the governor will sign the bill. So that gives me great encouragement. So even he's come around, not that he was, I'll say, anti-nuclear, but I've been told that he will definitely sign the bill. So I'm hopeful that maybe with a new administration in Washington that seems focused on cutting regulation, the regulatory environment, and with the Secretary of Energy being from Colorado, who I'm sure is well aware of the benefits of nuclear energy, is that we can bring down the costs. And also these small modular reactors that Representative Winter and I have talked about, and the molten salt reactors, they don't take up near the land, about a tenth of the land of a solar farm. And so I'm confident that when the first one, because there are entities out there, even here in Colorado, that I know that are keenly interested in the molten salt reactors. And once the first one, somebody decides to pony up for the first one, that there will be other entities out there, be it Pueblo or Northwest Colorado, any number that will say, hey, we don't want to be left behind, because after you build that first one, the second, third, and fourth one come pretty quick.
Well, you heard it here first. If House Bill 1040 passes, apparently we have it from a good source that the governor will sign the bill. So just we're breaking news, hopefully. And Energy Secretary Chris Wright is just released a 9-point plan. Two of those points directly related to nuclear. One being, of course, being a champion for nuclear, and then the second being just reducing some of the red tape. We only have a couple of minutes left, so do we want to do? We probably do one more question if it's really quick answer, and then we'll ask the two lawmakers to wrap up final remarks.
Sure, I'll jump in the chat since I did an in-person question. We have a question here asking about who in the state, he mentions that education is key in advancing the prospects of nuclear power in Colorado. Who in the state is providing community nuclear education, he asks.
There are groups that we've talked to. I mean, there's nonpartisan education groups. There's a handful of them, and they've been down in the districts. Action Colorado did a really neat energy forum this summer. And I would have to say right now, boots on the ground, there's maybe 2 or 3 organizations working on that education piece. They're sitting back and they're watching too. I mean, I've been in talks with, a bipartisan nuclear caucus type group that has just come into Colorado over the last year, and they want to do some education piece as well. But I really think at the end of the day, it's going to be up to us legislators. I mean, we see the people, so we're going to have to be the people that educate the people and try to explain to them this. So that's what I have done since I've been elected. Like I said, 1247, my first year ran it. I put about 25,000 miles a year in my district. And, anytime I get an update on energy, so there's national organizations do this, but I would probably say at the end of the day, it's going to be the boots on the ground. It's going to be the legislators that are going to have to get out and bring this concept to their communities, be honest, be forthright, and talk to them about the benefits and the negatives. And at the end of the day, this is a local thing, like Senator Liston said. We're not saying anybody has to put a plant in their backyard. We're not saying anybody has to put a plant in. But I think it's ultra important. And what Senator Liston touched on earlier, I even had a co-op in my district put in for a USDA grant a couple of years ago for a build out. So there will be monies. I know Epoch Times did an article right before the election saying that both presidential candidates were in favor of nuclear energy. So I think with the new administration and the energy pick coming out of the state gives us a leg up. And ma'am, that ties back into the question that you said earlier. Colorado don't want to be left in the dark on this, and no pun intended. But I think it's important that we tie the education piece into now that we have some federal push, and then we have local entities that I know that are chomping at the bit to get this done. I know, Wild County's really excited about this. So the education will happen, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be up to us legislators to get with the people and talk about this.
So I think you're going to hear from some of those boots on the ground in the second panel. You'll hear from a few groups that are on the ground in Colorado, but that'll be the second panel. So I want to give our lawmakers, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, just wrap up, give us your final thoughts on House Bill 1040 and nuclear energy just in general. Senator Liston, why don't we go with you?
Very good. Well, thanks, Amy, and everybody in the Independence Institute. I won't steal your thunder, but you talk about some of the groups, which I know you're going to be hearing. Certainly the Colorado Nuclear Alliance, they've done wonderful work, as well as another group I'm familiar with is the American Conservation Coalition. Those are two groups of young, energized professionals that are doing yeoman's work in spreading the word and the truth about the nuclear industry. And I'm excited to work with them and others. I would encourage anybody listening to this to come to the hearing next Thursday at 1:30, the old Supreme Court chamber, and put in, say what's on your mind. It's important that they hear from the people. So with that, thank you. And we're going to make great headway this year.
Great. Thank you, Senator Liston. Representative Winter?
I just want to thank you all for having me on and having this conversation with us. Thank you for the comments in the chat, and thank you for the questions. I'm excited at the prospect. I'm in my second term. I'll come back as long as my people want me, and as long as I'm here, I'm going to advance this energy source. I'm going to advance the narrative, and I'm going to continue to educate my constituents and learn at the same time. Because one thing is there's a ton to learn about this, and I've learned so much over the last 3 years, and I have a lot more to learn. I mean, like you said, there are nuclear physicists that talk about this stuff every day, and trying to get all that information together is important. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. And like you said, once again, thank you for having us this evening. And if there's any other events you have or any other events you'd like us to speak at, please reach out. That way we can keep spreading the good word about micro and small modular reactors.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who tuned in for our first panel. We're going to take just about a 1-minute break at best. We're going to bring up the next panel. We've got actually a total of 4 speakers for that. 3 will be on Zoom, and then fabulous Jake Fogelman here from the Independence Institute will be representing Colorado's best state-based think tank. So we'll do that. We'll get everybody pulled up, and then we'll get started with the next panel. So on this panel, we've got 4 state leaders. We've got Jake Fogelman from the Independence Institute. We've got Dave Thielen, who has Dave has been, I don't mean to label you with some, but you've been a little manic about how you've educated yourself on nuclear. Dave is liberal and loving it, and he's on Substack. And I'm telling you, you've got to read his stuff. Some of the best research, physics degree, but some of the best research, and he'll tell you his story. And then we also have Ella Rose from the Colorado Nuclear Alliance. And we have Sarah Rosa from the American Conservation Coalition. You heard the 2 lawmakers talk about young people and how many young people and how exciting it's been to see young people involved in all of this. And what we have found, even in our own polling, is that young folks actually that they love nuclear. So we're going to do this just a little bit differently. We'll go down the line. We'll let everybody introduce themselves. But I've got a kind of a question for when they do introduce themselves that I want to prep them with. So we're going to start real quickly with Jake Fogelman from the Independence Institute. He's our policy director. Jake, tell us a little bit about you. You can tell us about II and nuclear energy, but also just give us the political landscape and the power generation landscape that we are in right now, and why 1040 could be a game changer.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Good evening, everyone. Glad you all could join us, and folks on Zoom, thanks for tuning in. Like she said, I'm Jake Fogelman, the policy director here at Independence Institute. We're a state-based think tank dedicated to free market principles, and one of the issues we work on is energy. And in fact, before I got into my current role, I was a full-time energy and environmental policy analyst. I also co-host a energy-focused podcast called Power Gab that we do right here at Independence Institute. So folks should tune into that if you like hearing about state policy developments in the energy space. We developed a fun little listenership of folks that are tuned into energy issues. So, but to answer your question, just sort of, I think it's important to set the table a little bit about where Colorado stands in terms of energy policy, because it puts a point on why bills like House Bill 1040 and just nuclear in general are so important. So Colorado's current electricity mix is about 33% coal, 30% gas, a little bit less wind, about 6% solar, and a smattering of hydro and biomass and the like, right? So coal is still the single largest source of electricity in the state, as it has been for decades. But of course, that's changing. Thanks to laws passed at the state legislature and regulatory proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission, Colorado's entire coal fleet, which again, the single largest source of electricity, will cease to exist in about 5 years. So that's about 3.5 gigawatts of baseload, always available power that just won't be on the system anymore. And to put that into perspective, that's enough to power between 1 million and 2 million homes. So we're talking about a lot of juice here. Now, as this is happening, we also have separate policy directives as well as market forces that are sort of coalescing to create the biggest increase in electricity demand that the country has seen in at least a generation. So on the policy side, you have the push for things like electric vehicles to replace your traditional gas cars. You have heat pumps to replace natural gas furnaces and other home heating devices, electric appliances. But on the market side, of course, you have the rise of data centers and AI, crypto mining, marijuana grow operations, other large industrial and commercial super users. And so just to give you an idea of what that means for Colorado, Xcel Energy, the state's largest electric utility, just last year announced that it has already received 9 gigawatts worth of requests for data centers on its system. 9 gigawatts. That's more than Xcel's current system peak demand in the summer right now, just in data center requests, right? And on the policy side, they submitted a filing to the PUC that if we were to reach the electric vehicle, heat pump, and electric appliance penetration needed to meet state decarbonization goals, it would increase average household peak consumption of electricity by 220%. Combining those two factors, they predict that overall system demand on Xcel's system by 2050 could quadruple. So just as you hear from my fellow co-panelists today, and obviously the panel you heard earlier, I just think it's important to keep that stuff in mind as to why it's critical that we consider alternative sources of, one, zero carbon power, right, to meet the state's statutory directive that it be clean, but two, reliable, abundant power as we go towards this sort of fragile period in the grid.
Thanks, Jake. And I want to go, something that you said makes me, I'm going to go to Dave Thielen of Liberal and Loving It. He's the creator of Liberal and Loving It on Substack, and some of the best posts just about nuclear and why we need it. But something that Jake mentioned, Dave talked about he talks a lot about wind, and Jake mentioned wind. So Dave, introduce yourself. And you jumped into this nuclear versus wind sort of research. You went into the deep end.
All right. So went to University of Colorado 50 plus years ago, got a degree in physics. And of course, 2 years after that, never touched physics again and went into software. And worked for a bunch of startups, worked for Microsoft on Windows. My wife and I created a software company here in Colorado about 21 years ago. Grew it to a really nice size, sold it. Everybody who worked there got a nice payout for it. Retired with too much time on my hands. I want to preface this with, I joke that I'm very liberal, or as they call me in Boulder, a conservative. About the only place that you can have that. But both times Trump got elected, I won't say I cried, but I came very close to it. But I've always looked at what works, and I've always dived into it myself. And on this energy stuff, it's the funniest thing. It started off on investing. I figured the data centers, the need for those, we haven't even seen the beginning of that. It is just going to grow exponentially for a while. And it was where to invest. And that led me to the power grid. And that led me into, all right, what's going on in the power grid? Well, then the physicist in me goes, this stuff is really interesting. And I've been blogging politically in Colorado for over 20 years. And I interviewed Governor Polis, Senator Bennett, Senator Hickenlooper, Representative Neguse, DeGette, blah, blah, blah. So I started writing about it too. And what Amy asked about, back in the past election, if there had been something on the ballot of, will you vote to increase your utility bill 2% to bring in more wind energy? And for me, it would have come out to, $100 a month or something. No, it wouldn't even been that high. Anyways, I would have happily paid $100 a month for more wind energy because renewables, yay. And I happened to trip across a thing where it was mentioning, all right, normally for gas, they use something called a combined cycle gas turbine. You don't need to know what it is. But for backup, where they use something on and off real fast, they use something called a single cycle gas turbine. And I won't go into all the reasons why, but the bottom line is if you did not have wind, you would have for that base load those combined cycle gas turbines. With wind, when the wind doesn't blow, you're using these single cycle gas turbines, which pollute CO2 at about twice the rate as the combined cycle. The wind is hitting those wind generators about 1/3 of the time. Well, between 1/2 and 1/3, there's 1/6. The end result is with wind generators, you end up with more CO2 emissions than if you just didn't have them. And I went through it. I ran these numbers and these calculations and these assumptions past a lot of people, including, for those of you who know Reddit, I put it on the wind turbine group when I thought I had everything in there. And they tore into me and they found a couple of little things, but one person actually found a mistake in my math that had not been found elsewhere, and I corrected for that, fixed it. But the bottom line is, even after having been reviewed by the people on Reddit and the wind turbine group, and energy group's been very good on that also, the numbers are that there are more emissions from having wind than from not.
Wow. Dave Thielen, liberal and loving it. Next, I want to go to Ella Rose from the Colorado Nuclear Alliance, who's gotten a lot of airtime. The Colorado Nuclear Alliance, our legislators talked about it. Our legislative panel mentioned you all in the work that you're doing. Ella Rose is the president of the Colorado Nuclear Alliance. Ella, tell us about the Colorado Nuclear Alliance and how you've brought, you guys have coalesced around with a number of different perspectives. You brought together conservatives, liberals, people who are in the oil and gas business, people who are in other. You guys have managed to bring together a unique group of people all supporting nuclear.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My co-host Atlas here. I should be representing Mothers for Nuclear. So yeah, what we've been doing, and the theme that I heard from Senator Winter, or Representative Winter, and Senator Liston is what we as a group have sort of coalesced our mission around, and that's education. I start conversations nowadays with, we just need to talk about it because for so long, it hasn't been a subject that anybody discusses. And that's been to the detriment of our communities. So we need to have these conversations. We need to talk about nuclear energy. And you're right, the group, the Colorado Nuclear Alliance, was a group of concerned citizens, concerned scientists, environmentalists. I'm personally here for the environment. Actually, I'm a solar agrivoltaics developer, and I know enough about renewables that I don't see renewables playing a full role in our energy needs of the future. So that's why I'm here. But we see the need for education everywhere. And so that's where we really focused our efforts in bringing the truth about nuclear energy to especially our lawmakers. We are a registered 501c4, so we get more involved in the political side of things. And like Representative Winter was saying, we want to make sure that our legislature has the information, the correct information, so they can make informed decisions. And thanks to the Nuclear Caucus and Senator Liston really helping develop that educational process for our lawmakers, that's where we've come in and bring in. Our group has a lot of experts in it already, a lot of engineers, some people that are in or have retired from the nuclear energy space. But a lot of us are just concerned that we have AI coming in, we have these data centers. Colorado is going to get left in the dark, hopefully not literally, but our other states are doing something about it, and we are just really hoping that wind and solar and pixie dust are going to solve our problems for the future. And I don't know of any energy generating pixie dust available in Colorado, but I do know that we do have uranium available. And so we're trying to bring that education, not just of the generation piece, but of the full life cycle of a nuclear power grid. So when we talk about that, there's obviously the generation of the electricity, but there's also the fuel. And we do have some strong mining communities that are not afraid of the U word. They welcome it and they're excited about it because, like our representative said, these are communities that need good blue collar jobs. A $17 an hour welding job at Vestas, and I've been there, the factory is pretty cool, is not going to replace those high paying quality jobs in the future. And then you have interim and potentially long-term storage of spent fuel. Senator Liston was talking about that being in those dry casks. These are all pieces of the puzzle that people need to be educated on. What is the technology like nowadays? How are we doing this safely? What does it cost? What are the tax benefits? What's one of the things that we haven't talked about a whole lot? Wind and solar have grown. The technology has advanced because of the government's incentives to help that technological process. And nuclear is not asking for those tax write-offs. So if you're looking at communities like Pueblo, who are going to be missing millions and millions of dollars and have people leaving their community because they can't have those high-paying jobs, then you need a tax-based replacement if you're going to save that community. And nuclear is one of the only things across all of the aisles that can actually accomplish all of these things and produce energy for long periods of time cleanly. And that is why I am here.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks to the Colorado Nuclear Alliance for being part of tonight and being willing to be sort of a co-sponsor, co-host along along with the Independence Institute. And with that, I want to go to Sarah Rosa. Sarah Rosa is from the American Conservation Coalition. She's the policy director there. They are a national organization, and she lives in Colorado, and there's also a Colorado chapter. And I'm not going to steal their thunder, but they got some airtime with our lawmakers too. And there's something special about the American Conservation Coalition. And I think it's because of the generation that they represent. Sarah, thanks so much for being here. Let's hear about ACC.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and hosting such an important conversation. I think, like others mentioned, there's some pretty big choices we need to make about our energy future. So, as you mentioned, I'm with the American Conservation Coalition. We're a national nonprofit. We were founded in 2017 by a group of young conservatives who basically wanted to fill this ideological gap that they saw in the environmental movement that they felt like was preventing like effective, durable action. That's largely just the fact that, you know, the left was largely engaged in sort of dominating the conversation, and the right was like not engaged and not really at the table. So since 2017, we've actually grown to over 60,000 grassroots members on college campuses and in communities across the country. And so really our mission is that, just to build the conservative environmental movement. And we do that by, you know, building this grassroots strength and then sort of activating their voices on Capitol Hill and even in state legislatures across the country, and then amplifying their voices through social media and op-eds to show sort of the awesome work that they're doing. And really a lot of our work centers around sort of our policy platform, which is both energy and conservation. I'll focus on the energy part, that's most relevant here. But there's 3 pillars of that, and one of the pillars is just unleash nuclear energy, which I think really speaks for itself and just proves how important that is to our members and how much they believe that in order to sort of achieve all the goals that we want, right? Like clean energy, affordable, reliable energy, like nuclear is going to be a central piece of that, and I think is why they're so passionate about it. And you know, I was a member before they hired me, and I testified on Senator Liston's bills in support, and we've had other members do the same over the past few years, and are just so excited, hopefully, that this is the year for Colorado and nuclear. And yeah.
Thank you, Sarah Rosa from the American Conservation Coalition. One of the questions, and I'm just going to pull up questions from the audience, and so if there are more, please grab those and send those up. But one of them is, and probably whoever wants to chime in, but actually, Jake, I know that the Independence Institute has actually studied this, and it's one of the questions is the cost. We hear a lot that wind and solar are much cheaper. The levelized cost of energy says wind and solar are much less expensive, and nuclear is very expensive. But is that actually, is that the case?
Yeah, this is a complicated question that we could probably do a whole panel event just digging into. But
can I jump in for just a second on this? Because this is one of the things that I just ran through. I had myself torn a new one, more by the nuclear people. It said I favored wind too much. But it's not a simple one. If you want 1.4 to 1.6 gigawatts of power, nuclear is going to cost you between 5 and 7 billion if you go to one of the Korean construction companies that are doing that consistently, not just in Korea, but Korea, Turkey, the UAE, and so forth. If you want 1.6 power from wind, you're looking at, and it's rougher here because where's it sited and whatever, but 3.5 to 7 billion for the wind generators. The transmission lines, depending on where it is, are probably between $500 million and $2 billion. The batteries, so that it actually runs consistently, you're in the neighborhood of like another 8 billion just to cover a 3-day doldrum. And we're not talking 0%, but the wind is at, 0, 10%, down to 5, up to 15, back down to 10. And you still have to pay for the entire gas infrastructure with all the gas turbines and gas pipelines for when the wind goes dead for 4 days. End of story.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm telling you, liberal and loving it. Dave has done so much research just in the last few months. Jake, I want to talk a little bit about the pieces that make wind and solar more expensive, and also the research that Independence Institute has done and what they found.
Yeah, so Dave sort of articulated the reason that is, looking at just what's known as a levelized cost analysis. You see this all the time whenever you hear claims that wind and solar are close to free. They've never been cheaper than the cheapest form of energy that humanity's ever seen. It's a narrow focus on just individualized project costs. It's not the cost of a marginal addition to the grid. It's not a system-wide cost. So as Dave kind of articulated, you're paying for the project, a particular wind or solar project. You're also paying for the transmission to interconnect that to the grid. You're also paying for the backup gas turbine in case that goes down, or the battery, as he laid out. None of those costs are captured in a levelized cost analysis. To your point, we did a study on this a couple of years back, partnering with some folks who were then at a Minnesota think tank, but now work at a group called Always On Energy Research. They do energy modeling. And they ran the numbers for us on just what a solely wind, solar, and batteries grid would look like in Colorado, and what a grid that incorporated nuclear and some batteries as well, where that would pencil out cost-wise. And I'm blanking a little bit on the exact numbers, but it's just an astronomical difference. The level of overbuilding that you'd need to do, aka building far more nameplate capacity wind and solar than what your demand actually is, because you have to account for periods where maybe in one region of the state it's an overcast day or the wind's not blowing so much, and you, as a grid operator, you're not allowed to just throw your hands up and say, oh, well, sorry, we don't get power that day. So you end up overbuilding. All that overbuilding needs transmission to be able to connect the generation to where it's consumed, and transmission is one of the fastest growing costs in the electricity sector. So all of these things add up, and it is an order of magnitude more expensive to go that route versus incorporating clean, firm power, which, yes, can be expensive upfront, capital cost. None of this is free, but it saves you a whole lot of pain in the end and a lot of money in the end, too.
And I think there are two key things on that too: deliverable, dispatchable. So is it dispatchable, and then is it deliverable? And if you use Pueblo or Craig, you cut down on those transmission costs. I do want to get to Ella. Ella, you brought up something about mining, and Colorado has uranium. We have mined uranium here. We don't do much of it now, in part, I think, because people are scared of it. What is it? That supply chain, if we keep it in Colorado because we know we can do it well, that narrows that supply chain and lowers the cost for nuclear.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of I think I'm okay to say I'm a registered Democrat, although I lean in all different directions depending on the topic. I think, energy security is a real issue. We don't want to be beholden to any country's turmoil or another region's environmental and climate challenges, the catastrophes that we see increasingly, not even overseas, but in our own backyards. So energy security is real. It's regional. It's regional to the United States, but also to our different parts of the United States. So ideally, we would want all of our supply chain to be able to come from the United States, but we can actually do it all in Colorado. Some of our communities have been hosting interim fuel storage already. If you're familiar with Fort St. Vrain, there is spent fuel being stored there and has for decades. So that fuel can be utilized, reprocessing facilities. Another part of the supply chain I didn't mention, we can host reprocessing facilities here. We can mine the materials here, and we can have the energy generation here with projects in our communities. So if we're layering all of that, we have the economic development of those jobs, those good paying jobs. We have the tax money, both in income taxes from those good paying jobs, but also the property taxes from those facilities. So it is, we talk about this rural urban divide, and being in the renewable energy space for my professional career, I mean, the NIMBYism and the concerns for energy are real. Our rural communities have been supporting our second refrigerators and all of our iPads and connected devices, and now our AI increasingly with solar and wind. And this is one of the reasons why I got into agrivoltaics, so farmers can continue to farm. Talk about food security. And we have energy security and food security now. And so we have these other existential crises, if you will, using some of the terminology that you mentioned earlier. But yeah, there's so much opportunity in the supply chain for Colorado, similar to some of the opportunities in renewable energy that Colorado has been open to, getting more solar panel manufacturing. We know Vestas is here, those different parts of the supply chain in renewable energy, but we could even do more with nuclear energy.
Thank you, Ella. And I love one of the things that Colorado Nuclear Alliance often says, they keep energy local. And that is part of what you talk about with nuclear, because you can mine it, you can generate it, and even store it. And we've seen communities in Colorado that are exploring the possibility of storing it within their community. They're looking for that opportunity. I want to go to our friends at the American Conservation Coalition, Sarah Rose. Sarah, you represent a generation that is so connected. Old people like me, I mean, I didn't grow up connected. So when the power went out, the power just went out. You didn't have the TV. So what if the air conditioner didn't go on? Talk about how important it is that reliable, dispatchable, deliverable, and now for ACC, clean power is to your generation.
Yeah, and I think you sort of, hit that. Like our generation, I think maybe I'll go back to our members are largely like moderates and right of center folks, like 18 to 35. And really, they just want a different approach to environmental challenges. And I think that really sort of boils down to like wanting a more hopeful, optimistic, like pragmatic approach that doesn't necessarily like sacrifice our access to reliable, affordable energy while we're trying to meet these important environmental goals and targets. And I think we don't have to, right? Like nuclear energy is a great example that we don't need to. And so like we have, I think the people who are young conservatives really they didn't really find a home in the mainstream environmental movement, right? Like they really cared about this issue, but they maybe didn't necessarily agree with the solutions that were proposed. And so they found a home here, and they want sort of that like approach the environment that doesn't make them sacrifice like the economy. Like they want a win-win scenario. And I think that, and it's same with the moderates, right? Like they, again, don't want an environmental movement that feels like it's sacrificing things. We can and should find a way to sort of make it so that we're able to get a reliable, affordable energy to all Americans, because they all deserve that. At the same time, we're able to achieve these really ambitious and important climate and environmental goals. And so I think that's really where the passion for our members for nuclear energy comes from, right? Like they don't understand why we're taking this amazing tool off the table when we don't necessarily need to. And we have decades of knowledge now about how safe and how clean this energy source is. And I think it just to them, it's like a head scratcher, right? Like, why are we taking this incredible tool off the table when we should be using it? And so I think that's really where that like passion from at least our generation and our members comes from for nuclear energy.
It's actually interesting. There's a young generation that just has no fear of this. They don't have that fear. I want to go back to Dave Thielen real quick. Dave, 30% of Colorado's generating portfolio roughly is wind. What what do we do with those? And you know, do we build more? Do we let them play out their life cycle? But what do you've studied this so much. What do you see that relationship between nuclear and wind? And then you talked about larger reactors. Do you feel the same way about small, the small modulars?
All right, let me hit the small modulars first. You're going to start seeing them come off the assembly line at the very earliest 5 years from now, probably 7. You've got another 2, 3, 4 years till they start coming off at scale. I believe that climate crisis is an existential crisis. Yes, I'm a liberal. So screwing around and not doing anything for 10 years on it, there are perfectly good nuclear designs that not only can we do today, but will almost certainly actually be more cost effective. Because if you got to move a bunch of school kids, you use a school bus, you don't use a bunch of little sedans. In terms of the existing wind, I wouldn't turn it off. We've already made the dumb decision to build it there. It's now free aside from the backup gas and everything else. And, what else are you going to do at the moment? But continuing down the road, solar's got a place. Continuing down the road with wind, take a look at Germany, because they're where we'll be in about 10 to 15 years. The present German election right now, the primary issue it's on is energy, because the party in power shut down perfectly good nuclear plants, went all in on wind, and then every time the wind shuts down for a week, wholesale electricity prices go up by a factor of 50. Norway and Sweden are threatening to disconnect from the power grid to Germany because of that. And so it's, what do we do from this point forward? Whatever we have at the moment's working good enough. We've got the gas turbines in place to back up the wind, so that combination works. The gain is so small from shutting off the wind and switching to the better gas turbines. I don't think that's worth it. But I think the giant thing that needs to be done is to do so that a year from now, at the longest, we're starting in that process. And I think at a minimum, we need to be looking at putting in 6 gigawatts of nuclear potentially, preferably 12, because California is going down the Germany route and it's stupid, but we can then sell the excess power to California when they hit those problems.
Dave, always good for a quote, that's for sure. We only have a couple of minutes left, so what I want each of you to do is, take a few minutes, wrap up, give us your final thoughts. Also, plug your websites. People need to know where they can find each one of you, because you all have, slightly different perspective. But these were, state leaders, people leading on this issue of nuclear power. And then I want you to answer this for me too. So kind of lengthy final thoughts, but it'll be good, I guarantee it. Is 2025 the year for nuclear power in Colorado? Give us your websites to, promote yourselves a little bit, and then just final thoughts on the perspective on nuclear power from your group's perspective. And Jake, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. So Jake Vogelman, i2i.org, here at Independence Institute. i2i.org/energy is where you can find all of my blog posts and research we've put out and polling data we've commissioned and all the rest there. Powergab.org if you want to watch the energy podcast we do, if you like to get your energy information that way. Is 2025 the year? I do say I feel more optimistic than I have in past years. I've followed Larry Liston's endeavors in this regard, and before him there was former Senator Bob Rankin, who ran a study bill about small modular nuclear reactors and watched that get killed year after year after year on partisan, party lines. I got to tell you, seeing HB 1040 come down with bipartisan sponsorship, with crazy geographic diversity too, all the way from urban Denver to rural southeastern Colorado and northwestern rural Colorado. It's all over the state. That's heartening. It tells me that at least among some lawmakers, the politics are catching up with public opinion because public opinion's already been here. Speaking of polling, we commissioned a poll a couple of years ago before data centers were the big crisis du jour, and already found that a majority of Coloradans support nuclear energy and support including it in our portfolio. And that cross-party lines, a supermajority of Republicans, unaffiliateds, a plurality of Democrats. You've seen administrations on both the left and the right at the federal level support nuclear power. So I feel pretty good that maybe this year might be the year Colorado catches up to all that.
Sounds like, though, you're used to not seeing it pass, so slightly hesitant.
Yeah, cautiously optimistic, I should say.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Let's go to Sarah Rosa from the American Conservation Coalition, ACC.
I do think that 2025, I'm going to be optimistic that this is the year. I just think that you're seeing nationally, like regardless of political affiliation, people are acknowledging and recognizing that if we want to achieve all of our goals, and particularly climate goals, while making sure that Americans have access to energy, like nuclear has to be a part of the equation. And so I think people in Colorado are starting to recognize that. And, I think we've been at this for a few years in Colorado, but I really think this is the year. And if you want to learn more about ACC, you can go to acc.eco and follow along all the cool things that all of our grassroots members are doing across the country, because they're doing some really cool things.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Let's go to Ella Rose. Ella, let's let you talk about Colorado Nuclear Alliance a little bit more. Give out the website. I know people have dropped their websites in the chat, but answer, are you optimistic about nuclear energy?
Heck yeah, this is the year. I can feel it. I turned 40 this year, so it's like this has got to be the year for nuclear energy. Something big has to happen. Yeah, so our website is coloradonuclearalliance.org, and similar to ACC, we have a home for anybody that's concerned. This is not, like I said, I'm an environmentalist. I love that there's a group out there, because what we're trying to get are solutions. We are at a major inflection point in our history, not just as a state, but as a country, as a globe, as a human kind. And if we do not seize this opportunity to make a change in our approach to the climate and apply real solutions that we have today, not just pixie dust and unicorn tears, then we have the opportunity to change history forever, change the globe that we live in. And I'm not just talking about for the people that live here, but I've seen conservation efforts from years ago pay off. We've seen from COVID, no cars on the road. We shut down. The earth started healing. And it's so powerful to know that it's possible that we can turn this around. I just saw some bald eagles the other day chewing on, I don't know, a rabbit or a turtle on a frozen pond. And I was elated to see that this population of animals that represents our country that was endangered for so much of my life that I never saw until I was an older person live and in the wild actually was in my neighborhood. And so it gives me hope that we can make good decisions and make decisions for the future. So my daughter and all of our children have a future to have that has clean air and clean water and great economic opportunity. So visit us, become a member. We are all about educating not just the legislators, but also the public about what is nuclear energy, where's the opportunity. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about it at our kitchen tables and in our churches and classrooms and in our coffee groups and all of the places, because we need to. Otherwise, it's just going to get swept under the rug again, and we'll have an even more dire situation later on.
Thank you. Ella Rose from the Colorado Nuclear Alliance. And let's go to Boulder's Conservative. Is that what they actually call you, Dave?
No.
Oh my, liberal and loving it. Dave Thielen.
Yeah, you have to
is this
understand, Boulder is so liberal that
is this the year, though? Is
Yeah,
this the year for nuclear?
I told that joke to Senator Salazar, and he lost it laughing.
All right.
Okay.
Give us your website and tell us, is this the year that nuclear energy is embraced under the Gold Dome?
All right. So the website is liberalandlovingit.substack.com. And I invite you to read it because I sweated blood writing that stuff so that it was as short and clear, and it does not get into any kind of weird. I mean, there's basic math. You got to be able to add numbers, but worked very hard to lay it all out. And I went through immense, very rough review of it on getting the things I had wrong fixed and everything. So please, if you have any questions about the things I said, don't believe me, but look at what I put through on it. As to is this the year for it, I'm pessimistic because as one of the people said, I don't remember which one, it's the present plan requires pixie dust. The present plan requires the state spending $29 billion every 10 years for batteries. And batteries are getting cheaper, but not that much. And even with all that, it's only 95% renewable. And as best I can tell, nobody, not NREL, not the Department of Energy, not the Idaho Federal Labs, ever did a research study of what's the CO2 emissions of wind's backup. And when there's that purposeful choice to not study what you're truly getting with wind because of the required backup, when there's this choice of somehow all these things will magically increase their energy density and lower their cost, so wind and solar will do it, there's been an awful lot of just wishful thinking that's gone on and an awful lot of choosing not to look at things. I hope it'll change, but getting people who are that out of it to change, I don't know.
So liberal and loving it, Dave Thielen. I just want to say a couple of things on this. One of the things Ella Rose talked about and Sarah Rosa also, this nuclear is the one area, and I mentioned this before, but nuclear is the one area. If you do your Venn diagram, there are those of us who are super concerned about reliable power. Like, I'm more worried about a blackout than that's my existential threat, is not having power. People die. But on the other side, you have people who their existential threat is climate. And the one place on that Venn diagram that we meet is nuclear. So to Dave Thielen's point, can we, the people who have been championing, as Ella Rose calls them, pixie dust and unicorn tears, if you're the champion of that, can we get them to look at nuclear? And that's the question about 2025. I'm going to say I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm more optimistic this year than I have been in previous years. Not that that's any great standard, it's a relatively low threshold. But I am more optimistic because of the lawmakers and their how much work they have put into this. So I want to say that. I also want to thank everybody who's online, those who came in person, and I also want to thank Colorado Nuclear Alliance and ACC and Dave Thielen and our lawmakers and our speakers tonight. But none of this happens, one, without reliable power, and two, without a great production team. And there are guys that you do not see and haven't seen, but they spent a great deal of time figuring out. When I said, hey, let's do a Zoom event, and let's just have everybody on Zoom, and then let's live stream it, and then let's have some live audience, and then let's have some people sitting on the stage. I mean, they looked at me like she's out of her mind yet again, but I want to thank them because they made it work. So thanks to them, thanks to Vanessa, Tracy, the staff at the Independence Institute, and again, Independence Institute, 501c3, i2i.org, thinkfreedom.org, and Think Nuclear. Think Nuclear. House Bill 1040 is being heard on February 13th, Old Supreme Court chambers. That's next Thursday at 1:30 p.m. If you can't be there, please let your voice be heard. We need to get nuclear energy into Colorado's clean energy mix so that neither one of us have to be worried about the future. Anyway, with that, I thank you all and good night.